The moment I saw my prize-winning tomatoes missing, I knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a case of a few stray rabbits or some birds getting lucky. No, someone had been helping themselves to my farm like it was their personal grocery store. My heart pounded as I stared at the empty vines where rows of ripe, red tomatoes had been just yesterday. It wasn't just tomatoes either. Cucumbers, zucchini, and even my best bell peppers were disappearing like magic. But this wasn't magic. This was theft. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe the farmhands had taken some home. Maybe I had just imagined harvesting more than I did. But night after night, more vegetables went missing, and I was left standing in the middle of my farm, fists clenched, trying to understand how I was getting robbed under my own nose. The worst part? There were no signs of forced entry. No broken fences, no footprints, nothing. It was as if the vegetables had simply walked away. So I did what any farmer with a growing grudge and a touch of paranoia would do. I installed a motion sensor camera. It wasn't much, just a little setup near the vegetable patches, but I was desperate to catch this sneaky thief. And catch them I did. What I saw the next morning nearly made me choke on my coffee. There she was, Karen. I paused the footage, zooming in just to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. But there was no mistake. Karen, my entitled, nosy, always complaining neighbor, was sneaking into my farm in the dead of night, plastic bags in hand, stuffing them full of my vegetables like she was on a game show where the prize was free food. She wasn't even in a hurry. She strolled along, inspecting each vegetable like she was shopping at a farmer's market, occasionally discarding a pepper or two if it wasn't up to her high standards. I felt a mix of emotions: rage, disbelief, amusement. Karen was the last person I would have expected. Not because she was honest, but because she was always acting like she was too good for farm food. She had openly mocked my work in the past, claiming that she only bought organic from high-end grocery stores, yet here she was, elbow-deep in my crops, treating my farm like her personal Whole Foods. I sat back, gripping my coffee cup so hard I thought it might shatter. What was I supposed to do? March over there and demand my vegetables back? Call the police? The thought of explaining to an officer that my neighbor was waging a one-woman vegetable heist seemed absurd. But I couldn't let this slide. Karen had been a thorn in my side for years, complaining about my rooster crowing too early, nagging about the smell of manure, and even trying to get my farm shut down because she thought it ruined the neighborhood's aesthetic. And now she had the audacity to steal from me? Oh no. This wouldn't end with a simple confrontation. If Karen wanted free vegetables so badly, I'd give them to her. But I'd make sure she'd never steal from me again. The idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. I leaned forward, a wicked grin spreading across my face. If she wanted vegetables, she'd get them. But this time, they wouldn't be just any vegetables. No, I was about to introduce her to something truly unforgettable. Ghost peppers. I wasted no time. I went out and bought the spiciest peppers I could find: Carolina Reapers, ghost peppers, and Trinidad scorpions. I planted them right where my bell peppers had been, making sure they looked identical to the ones Karen had been so fond of stealing. I tended to them with extra care, watching them grow into fiery little weapons of vengeance. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night I checked my camera, hoping to catch her in the act again. And then, just as I knew she would, Karen returned. The footage showed her moving through the rows, once again helping herself to my crops, blissfully unaware that she was about to have the worst meal of her life. I could barely contain my excitement the next morning. I watched her from across the street as she carried a large grocery bag into her house, no doubt preparing to make some extravagant meal using her stolen goods. I could only imagine the moment she took that first bite. Hours passed, and I nearly gave up on witnessing the fallout in person. But then, right when I was about to head inside, I heard it. A scream. A long, agonizing, gut-wrenching scream that echoed through the entire neighborhood. I turned, watching as Karen burst out of her house, face red as a tomato, mouth hanging open like she was trying to suck in every ounce of air available. She stumbled across her lawn, waving her hands in the air, before running straight for her garden hose and spraying herself in the face. The sight was so ridiculous that I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. She gasped, choked, and then ran back inside, only to reappear seconds later with a gallon of milk, which she practically inhaled. The milk did little to help. She threw the empty jug to the ground, her eyes wild, her mouth still clearly on fire. Then, as if she suddenly realized what had happened, she turned her gaze toward my farm. Our eyes met from across the street. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The realization hit her like a freight train. She knew. Her expression twisted into pure fury. She stomped toward my house, face still flushed, hair a mess, sweat dripping down her temples. I stood my ground, arms crossed, waiting. "You!" she shouted, her voice raspy, barely able to speak. "What did you do?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Karen? You mean the vegetables you stole?" "Oh, those were a special breed I was testing. Extra spicy." She sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You poisoned me." I laughed. "I couldn't help it." "Poisoned you?" "Karen, it's just a pepper. Maybe next time, you should ask before stealing from my farm." Her face contorted with rage, but she couldn't argue. She had been caught red-handed. The only thing she could do now was storm off, which she did, muttering threats about lawsuits and calling the police. I wasn't worried. I had the footage. If anything, I was the one with legal leverage. As she disappeared back into her house, still fanning her mouth, I turned back to my farm, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. This was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to back down without a fight, but neither was I. And if she wanted a war, she was going to get one. The morning after Karen's ghost pepper meltdown was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching her front yard like a hawk. She hadn't shown her face yet, and I could only assume she was still recovering from the fiery inferno she had unknowingly unleashed upon herself. Part of me expected her to march over, screaming at me, demanding revenge. But the hours passed, and the neighborhood remained calm. Maybe she had finally learned her lesson. Maybe she realized that stealing wasn't worth the risk. I should have known better. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I noticed something strange. Cars were pulling up to Karen's driveway, and people were getting out, carrying trays and dishes covered in foil. Curious, I leaned forward, squinting to see what was going on. It didn't take long for me to realize what she was up to. A potluck. She was throwing a neighborhood potluck, and judging by the number of people showing up, she had gone all out with the invitations. I chuckled to myself. She was really trying to put on a show, pretending that everything was fine, acting like she hadn't spent the previous night rolling around in agony because of the peppers she stole. But then something dawned on me, something that made me sit up a little straighter. She was serving food. Panic crept in as I realized what that meant. The stolen vegetables. The ghost peppers. Had she used them in her cooking? Surely, she wasn't that careless. Surely, after experiencing the burn firsthand, she wouldn't risk inflicting that pain on an entire gathering of unsuspecting guests. Or would she? I grabbed my binoculars from inside and peered across the street. Karen was standing in the center of her backyard, smiling, laughing, playing the perfect hostess. On a long table behind her, there were several dishes, a massive salad, a big pot of what looked like pasta, and a tray of salsa. My stomach dropped. All of those dishes could easily contain my ghost peppers, and none of the guests had any idea. I had to see how this played out. Slipping on my boots, I made my way across the street, keeping my face neutral as I approached the party. Karen saw me coming, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling into a smug smile. She had to be furious with me, but instead of attacking, she played it cool. Well, she said, placing a hand on her hip. "Look who decided to crash the party." I smiled, pretending I wasn't completely focused on the food. Just came to see what all the excitement was about. Karen smirked, lifting a glass of lemonade to her lips. It's a celebration. A little thank you gathering for my wonderful neighbors. You should try some of the food. I made it myself. I glanced at the table, my pulse quickening. Either she had removed the peppers after last night's disaster, or she was about to ruin her own party in the most spectacular way possible. I wasn't sure which possibility entertained me more. As the guests started serving themselves, I took a step back, watching closely. A group of older women spooned generous portions of salad onto their plates. A father loaded up on the pasta, piling it high. A kid reached for a tortilla chip and scooped up a large helping of salsa. My heart pounded. This was it. The first scream came from the salad table. An elderly woman, dressed in a floral blouse, took a bite and immediately grabbed her throat. Her face turned bright red, her eyes bulging as she let out a strangled gasp. Then, chaos erupted. The father with the pasta let out a yell, dropping his plate as he stumbled backward, fanning his mouth with both hands. The kid with the salsa didn't even have time to react. One bite in, and he bolted toward the drink station, nearly knocking over an entire table in his desperate search for relief. People started shouting, coughing, gasping for air. A man dunked his head into the backyard fountain, splashing water everywhere. A woman grabbed an entire carton of milk and chugged it without stopping. Someone was on their hands and knees, wheezing, their face so red I thought they might actually explode. And through all of this, Karen stood frozen, watching in horror as her perfect potluck crumbled into madness. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. This was beyond anything I could have planned. I had expected Karen to suffer alone, but this? This was a full-blown disaster, a meltdown of epic proportions. And the best part? She had done it to herself. Karen finally snapped out of her daze, running toward the table, frantically trying to figure out what went wrong. She grabbed a piece of lettuce, sniffed it, then touched her tongue to it. Instantly, she let out a shriek and stumbled back, knocking over a plate in the process. What is happening?" she wailed, her hands shaking as she wiped at her tongue. One of the guests, an older man who had been foolish enough to take a big bite of the pasta, pointed a trembling finger at her. "What the hell did you put in this food?" Karen looked panicked, her eyes darting between the dishes, her mind racing. She had no idea. She hadn't even realized what she had done. And then, finally, her eyes met mine. Recognition dawned. Her mouth opened slightly. Her face, still red from the spice, twisted into an expression of pure, unfiltered rage. "You," she whispered, barely able to speak. I raised my eyebrows, feigning innocence. "Me?" Karen took a step toward me, but before she could say another word, the chaos around us reached new heights. Someone had called the fire department, claiming people were being poisoned. An ambulance arrived, though it was clear that no one was actually dying, they were just in extreme discomfort. Some guests were demanding answers, others were packing up and leaving, and a few were still running around the yard in search of relief. Karen, realizing the full weight of the disaster, turned back to her guests, raising her hands in an attempt to calm everyone down. I don't know what happened. I swear, I used normal ingredients. Nobody was buying it. People were furious, accusing her of trying to prank them, of ruining the potluck, of nearly sending them to the hospital. The perfect event she had planned had become an absolute nightmare. I decided I had seen enough. With a satisfied smile, I turned and walked away, listening to the chaos behind me. Karen's screams, the angry shouts of the guests, the sirens in the distance. It was music to my ears. By the time I reached my porch, I glanced back one last time. Karen was standing in the middle of the wreckage, her hair a mess, her clothes stained with spilled drinks and food. Her party was over. Her reputation? Likely ruined. And as I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. But I also knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat so easily. She would be back. And when she was, I'd be ready. The aftermath of Karen's potluck disaster rippled through the neighborhood like wildfire. News spread fast, and within hours, the entire town was buzzing about what had happened. People weren't just talking about the spice-induced meltdown, they were laughing about it. Videos had already started circulating online, capturing the chaos, the screaming, the frantic search for milk, the moment Karen herself had collapsed into a heap of regret. The title of the most popular clip? Karen vs. the hottest peppers on earth. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, she would take this as a lesson learned. That she would finally admit defeat, maybe even apologize for stealing from me. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't one to accept responsibility. No, she was the kind of person who would rather rewrite history than admit she was wrong. It wasn't long before she struck back. The first sign of trouble came the next morning. I was out in the fields, tending to my crops, when I saw a police cruiser pull up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, one of them adjusting his belt, the other holding a clipboard. I sighed, already knowing where this was going. As I approached, the taller officer gave me a nod. "Morning, sir. We got a complaint from a Ms. Karen Dawson about an incident involving..." He glanced down at his notes. Food tampering and possible poisoning. I let out a short laugh before I could stop myself. "Let me guess. She says I tried to kill her." The officer hesitated, then exchanged a glance with his partner. "Well, she did use the word attempted harm." I shook my head. "You mean with the vegetables she stole from my farm?" "Those vegetables." The second officer, a younger guy, scratched the back of his head. Yeah, about that. We did see some security footage she provided of her, acquiring the produce." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean stealing?" He cleared his throat. "Technically, yes." I crossed my arms. "So let me get this straight. She stole from me. Cooked stolen vegetables into a meal. Fed it to a whole bunch of people. And now she's mad that it didn't turn out the way she wanted." The officers looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, the taller one let out a breath. "Yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like." I could see the struggle on their faces. They had been sent here because Karen had insisted on filing a report, but the reality of the situation was as ridiculous to them as it was to me. "She wants to press charges," the younger officer finally said. "But considering the circumstances, well, I think we both know that's not gonna stick." I grinned. "Glad to hear you've got common sense." The officers gave me a few more formalities before driving off, and I watched them go, shaking my head. Karen had really tried to take the legal route. If nothing else, I had to admire the sheer audacity. But I also knew that she wouldn't stop there. Sure enough, the next few weeks turned into a passive-aggressive war. Every time I stepped outside, I'd find something ridiculous. A poorly printed sign near my driveway that read "Beware, unsafe farming practices." Flyers on my mailbox warning people about contaminated produce. An anonymous letter, though everyone knew it was from Karen, demanding that I issue a public apology for endangering the community. I ignored most of it, letting her tire herself out. But when she started making official complaints to the Homeowners Association, things got personal. One afternoon, I was out trimming the hedges when I saw a man in a cheap suit and an over-polished clipboard walking toward me. He had the eager yet exhausted expression of someone who really didn't want to be here. "Mr. Jack Carter?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm with the HOA. We've received multiple complaints regarding, well, a variety of things. Noise disturbances from your farm animals, an unpleasant odor affecting the neighborhood, and most recently, the potential health hazards of your crops." I exhaled through my nose. "And by multiple complaints, you mean Karen?" The man hesitated. "We are not at liberty to disclose." "It's Karen." He cleared his throat. "I can neither confirm nor deny." I folded my arms. "And let me guess. HOA rules say you have to investigate every complaint, even when they're clearly nonsense." He gave me a tired smile. "That's about the gist of it." I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Karen was relentless, I'd give her that. But I wasn't about to let her win. Tell you what, I said. Let's take a walk through the farm. You can check for hazards yourself. The man looked relieved, as if he had been dreading some kind of argument. He followed me as I led him through the property, pointing out the perfectly maintained crops, the well-kept animal enclosures, the irrigation system that was in full compliance with agricultural regulations. By the time we finished, he seemed almost embarrassed. Well, he said, flipping through his clipboard, everything seems to be in order. Of course it is. I'll let Ms. Dawson know that there are no violations. I smirked. Oh, please do. The man gave me a half-hearted nod and left, probably regretting every life choice that had led him to this job. That should have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't just a sore loser, she was a strategist. And her next move was as unexpected as it was hilarious. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail. A formal notice. Karen had been sentenced to community service for her repeated instances of trespassing and property damage. And where, you ask, was she assigned to complete her community service? My farm. I nearly fell over laughing. When she showed up, she looked like she had been forced to eat 100 more ghost peppers just to get there. She stood stiffly at the entrance to the farm, arms crossed, jaw clenched, wearing an expression of barely contained rage. "Welcome to your first day," I said cheerfully. She glared at me. "I hate you." I grinned. "Let's get you started." The next few weeks were the best of my life. Watching Karen, the woman who once thought she was too good for farm life, get down in the dirt, pull weeds, shovel manure, and haul bags of fertilizer was nothing short of poetic justice. She tried to find loopholes, tried to get out of the worst tasks, but I made sure she did her fair share. Every morning, she arrived looking miserable. Every evening, she left covered in sweat, dirt, and regret. By the time her sentence was over, I thought maybe, just maybe, she had changed. On her last day, she handed me a plate of cookies. I eyed them suspiciously. "What's this?" "A peace offering," she said flatly. I picked one up, sniffing it. Something felt off. I took a bite, and instantly regretted it. Heat exploded in my mouth, my vision blurred, and I wheezed, choking on the inferno. Karen's lips curled into a victorious smirk. "Ghost pepper extract," she said sweetly. "I figured you'd appreciate the irony." I spat the cookie into the dirt, coughing. Then, despite the pain, I burst into laughter. "Touché, Karen." She crossed her arms. "We're even." I wiped my eyes, still laughing. "Oh, not even close." She narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "You'll see." Karen paled slightly, then turned on her heel and marched away. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.